Back to this topic. More information on the Pacers and Lakers chatter about a Russell Westbrook trade, including the proposal the Lakers almost made, some Pacers involvement, what a deal would look like, why it could still happen. Of course, we'll get to it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, we're back talking about the thing I thought was over for the offseason. Russell Westbrook, the Pacers, the Lakers, a long in-depth piece in The Athletic from Shams Charania, Sam Amick, and Jovan Buha, covers the Lakers, about the Lakers dynamics, them considering a Westbrook trade with an updated potential offer that didn't even happen, some of the reasons they would and wouldn't make a deal, a third team that wasn't involved, something else they wanted from the Pacers. My goodness, there was so much detail in this that was very fascinating, and none of it really changes my perspective on what this looks like. But I want to dive into all of it and talk about why, one, I think the saga is not dead, although fittingly, today, if you're listening the day this comes out, is Tuesday the 4th, which is one day before Pacers basketball starts. And once the games start, I will, until more news comes out like this, completely ignore this because games are more important than stuff that might or might not happen. And two, it wouldn't be for about 2 months. I mean, just given how the NBA schedule works. So not a ton to dive into after this, but there was a ton in this. So what we'll do is just run through the report chronologically because tidbit by tidbit, it sort of builds up from why they were considering it to what the offer was to back and forth stuff. And so, yeah, there's tidbits that fit the Lakers side and Pacers side, but I think chronologically makes the most sense. And at the end of this, talk about, does having Westbrook on the Pacers itself actually make any sense? I get that question a lot, and I sort of write it off as an obvious thing, but if I get the question a lot, it must not be. So we'll dive right in. Thanks for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every day, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Hey, let's talk about this. So right off the jump, and Shams, Buha, and Amick say there's still a chance Russ gets traded in the coming weeks and months, and that they circled back around with the Pacers right before camp, right before media days and things like that. And, this is something I talked about on the Miles Turner Staying podcast, is a lot of stuff could reignite this. Media day would be Russ coming back and potentially being, a topic for this team to discuss. And a poor Lakers start would be another reason that adds pressure to them to make a trade. So media day was the first sort of hurdle. I'm unsurprised that was something that ignited talks again, and the Lakers having internal chatter about this. And the Lakers, according to the report, are hoping Westbrook hits his stride and ultimately chose not to do anything. But according to this report again, the Lakers spent several days talking with the Pacers about trades. This would have been last week, so a little bit after, ironically, we spoke with Kevin Pritchard and the rest of the Pacers front office. It's interesting that it would be several days because later we'll talk about that there was no formal offer, and there's not a lot of wiggle room to me. Second-round picks or third teams can help, but unless the framework is obviously agreed upon or close or something like that, it doesn't seem like something that would take a several-day negotiation. So this seems like something to me that either got more complicated or that was really internally debated by one of those two teams. And based on this reporting, I would guess that team is the Lakers, that spent a long time thinking about, is this something they want to do? Is this a trade that they want to make? Now the juicy part everybody wants, of course, the reported offer that the Lakers were internally considering Russell Westbrook and unprotected first rounders in 2027 and 2029 for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. Now, if you've listened to me cover this saga, or whatever you want to call it, of Westbrook to the Pacers, this has been, to me, what the Pacers' goal return should be the entire time. We've seen this offseason the value of unprotected first-round picks. That's why the Hawks were able to get DeJounte Murray. That's why the Cavs were able to get Donovan Mitchell instead of the Knicks. Not exactly. There's a lot of other factors and valuations of young players, but the Cavs ponied up unprotected picks, and the Knicks were trying to send some picks with protections. The Minnesota Timberwolves got Rudy Gobert from Minnesota, and they sent unprotected picks. That matters so much. If a team implodes, great, you get a better pick. And if not, you still get what you would have got if there was protections on the pick. It just has so much more value. And I think teams are starting to realize that as they put together these bigger packages. And so if you're a team like the Pacers, who by 2027 or 2029, maybe you'd like to have flipped those for pieces of your next core. Or at that point, you don't know what the Lakers are going to be like. Maybe they will be awful after LeBron retires and AD's in his 30s. You would like those to be unprotected so you don't lose them for nothing, because 2029 is the farthest out teams can trade picks. If the 2029 first rounder the Lakers are offering is protected, they can't get a first if it doesn't convey. They can't protect it and say, oh, they get a 2030 first. It's not allowed, right? So you have to think about what that level of protection adds to, and that's the last year picks can be traded. So all that background for me to say, I think that offer, 2027 and 2029 first rounders, unprotected for Buddy and Miles, should be what the Pacers were wanting all along. The way I've sort of thought about it is Russell Westbrook makes $47 million this season. He's overpaid, right? It's bad money. It doesn't help the Pacers at all. Sure, they get closer-ish to the salary floor, but if Turner and Miles are both in, not very much, right? So his salary, he's very much overpaid and hurts a team's books and flexibility. One first-round pick required to get off of his contract, in my brain, in my calculus of this. And then the other first-round pick would be for the combined package of Hield and Turner. And I think Turner's worth a first-round pick, and Hield is about a neutral value player on his current deal. That's where I get the two firsts and unprotected, because, look, the Lakers have Russell. Like, the way I usually view trades is the team that employs the player has leverage. But in this case, it's a negative asset player. So I think the Lakers have some leverage because they can go to other teams and present competing offers. But the way this will work will be very interesting in how protections work and things like that. So I think the Pacers would have had to strongly consider that trade if it actually happened. Spoiler alert, it doesn't sound like it came as an official offer. We'll get to that momentarily. But that was the offer that the Lakers were mulling internally. Can they get both Turner and Buddy Hield on their team? Does it make sense to do so? Is the cost worth it? And so they had a team, Darvin Ham, their new head coach, Joey, Jesse, and Jeannie Buss, their ownership group/management, Kurt Rambis, and of course their GM and vice president of basketball operations, Rob Pelinka, on this sort of group to make a decision. And this is all according to the report. This is not me telling you this from my information. Again, this is in The Athletic. You should read it. But that group wanted to get to a consensus, right? Rob Pelinka has the power to make the ultimate decision, but that group wanted to get to a consensus on if they thought this exact trade was worth doing, especially 1 year after they decided to do the Westbrook trade in the first place, right? They have to decide if, and this is mentioned in the piece, what the full value of the trade would be. It would be something like 3 firsts and Kuzma and losing Caruso and KCP and all this stuff for Turner and Hield. Like, that's expensive. But you also have to think about the sunk cost of, you already did the Westbrook trade and it messed up. Either way, they have a lot to think about, and apparently this group either couldn't come to a consensus or all of them did except for Pelinka, and he ultimately, with his power in this, decided, no, this is not happening. So the Lakers were considering this, of course, according to the reporting. But one reason they didn't, according to the report, is they think there could be a better deal out there down the line. And this is something I've talked about from a Pacers perspective. That's a really unique part of this, is that first-round pick, those 2 first-round picks the Lakers own, that's it for their tradable assets, really. They traded away Horton Tucker for Patrick Beverley. So if they trade away those 2 firsts, they have a couple second-rounders here and there in theory. They have a second-round pick incoming from the Bulls and the Wizards, but they can't trade any. They'll have their own first, but they can't trade them. They have their 2026 and 2028 and 2024 second-rounders out the door as well. Like, they would just have basically a couple seconds and like Austin Reeves left in terms of assets. All that to say, one of the reasons I think the Lakers, and rightly, this is smart of them, have some cold feet in doing a deal like this is that's it. They cannot make another trade for another star at a future time or use the picks and stuff that they have for something else that maybe is better fitting or a better value for them. Once they commit to something, that's it. And they're only assessing that off their current situation. If their record changes, if anything changes, it might make more sense for them to then make a trade. So I totally understand why they think, hey, maybe down the line we can get a better deal that makes more sense for us. Maybe someone else becomes available. Like the Jazz could eventually decide to trade all their players, or who knows? Like, a million things happen. There's a random trade request in the NBA, it seems like, every season. If the Lakers want to hold their assets for that, sure, that makes sense. That's smart of them to think about in this way. But that is sort of what it sounds like. The implication is that's what's holding them back to ultimately make an offer. And Rob Pelinka, according to the report, decided to remain patient. Deal does not get offered despite being internally discussed. So all this 10 minutes so far, be talking or whatever it is for you listening, to say the Lakers strongly considered what I think was the right price for the deal. Unprotected first in 2027 and 2029, plus Russell Westbrook for Miles Turner and Buddy Hield, but ultimately didn't make the offer. And I get why they didn't do that. And I think that a lot of the haggling will be over protections if this trade ever does happen. It seems like we've been talking about it for months and months and months. But if it can't happen, it can't happen. And the Lakers are right, I think, to see if something else is out there. The season has not started yet. They have a new coach. They still have LeBron James. I get why they're being patient, but from a Pacers perspective also, right before camp, I mean, that timing is tough, and Russell Westbrook has little value to your team. There's a lot of hurdles that would have made the timing awkward, and I think a different date would make a little more sense. We'll try John with this report, though. Still a ton of details to get to that I haven't even covered, but that is a good opening segment discussing the background, what the ultimate offer was, and things like that. Before we continue talking about this article in The Athletic, which again, I highly encourage you all to read. I can only talk about what other people say so much without feeling kind of guilty. I kind of hate being an aggregator like this sometimes, but it's called Inside the Lakers, Russell Westbrook Plan, Why He's Still in LA in The Athletic. So highly recommend you read that. Before we move on talking about it, I want to talk to you guys about Built Bar. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you're depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. There's a new flavor of Built Bars, delicious, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. It's awesome. You've got to try Built Bars. If you haven't, they're protein bars that taste like candy bars. Super delicious. I've tried a ton of protein bars that I bought in a grocery store. They either are chalky or way too chewy or don't taste like the flavor they say. Built Bar, none of those problems. 100% covered in real chocolate. Super easy to chew. Absolutely delicious. The cookie dough chunk puff, I've tried it myself. So good. Real chunks of cookie dough right in the top. Marshmallow flavorings. And the best part about Built Bar, they taste like candy bar, but they're good for you. Only 160 calories, 15 grams of collagen protein in them, so your body digests it faster for the energy. It's awesome. You can get a box for you or your family at built.com, which is fantastic because they have a promo code LOCKEDON15 to give you 15% off every time. They have a bunch of different flavors you can buy or a mixed package with some of their most popular. You got to try them yourself. Go to built.com, use that promo code LOCKEDON15 to get 15% off your order. That promo code again, it's LOCKEDON15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, I'm sure they'll be talking about this on the Lakers side over at Locked On Lakers. Plus, the Lakers are playing a preseason game later tonight. Hear all about that. And also, make sure you check out the Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview starting October 10th. 6-episode extravaganza to get you ready for the NBA season. Local experts on all of our Locked On shows preview the upcoming NBA season on the Odyssey app starting October 10th. Search for Ultimate Pro Basketball Preview and Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get podcasts. Russell Westbrook to the Pacers talk has resumed. And by that, I mean I'm resuming talking about it. Not that the teams have necessarily resumed it, but the reporting in The Athletic suggests talks were happening and the Lakers were considering it before ultimately not. So more details came out in this report from Shams Charania, Jovan Buha, and Sam Amick. One of those being other trade frameworks wouldn't really work for the Lakers. And I think this is a big deal, right? They tried to do the whole Kyrie Irving thing for a second there. Nets said, no, this doesn't make sense for us. He opted in. There's no real trade that makes sense for Irving for Westbrook. And the Jazz, they couldn't get anything done with, Bogdanovich and Clarkson. And I think Markkanen was mentioned in there as well. Maybe don't quote me on that one, but the other two guys for sure. So those two teams being out is a big deal for the Pacers. There's not a lot of teams where this trade makes sense. There's not a lot of big salaries that are so awful that it's easier to make the swap. And there's not a lot of tanking teams. Maybe San Antonio, but that's the only other one that would be interested in something like this. So again, the Pacers don't have leverage necessarily because the Lakers are the team that would ultimately have to agree to something like this and sending away the big assets. But this does help the Pacers if these other teams are not really interested in doing the frameworks the Lakers are offering. That makes the Pacers the most attractive team and natural fit for the Lakers. They have one of the most cap spaces left in the league, around with San Antonio, for example, and they have the veterans the Lakers would want. Like, it's a rare combination that they have. Utah doesn't have the cap space the Pacers have. San Antonio doesn't have the vets, right? They are a pretty unique fit, and that makes the leverage part of this in the negotiation super interesting, especially if they can't get a deal done with the Nets. They can't get a deal done with the Jazz. That's a big deal for the Pacers. So there were several other trade iterations because they had to work directly with the Lakers. One of them was without Miles Turner, and it was only one first. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, that means that Buddy Hield has way more value in a trade than I thought. Another one was without Miles. That also included one first. That is one of the compromises I've suggested myself. If the Lakers and Pacers can't get a deal done, one unprotected first and Westbrook for Buddy Hield. Then the Lakers still have picks they can trade in the future. They get a player that fits their team better, get off of a player that doesn't at all. That's made some sense to me for a long time. So I'm glad that that one was included because, again, it made sense in my head. But ultimately, again, none of those obviously happened. In another way, it was discussed being modified. This was really interesting. The team that was specifically mentioned was the Memphis Grizzlies as a third team. I thought this was fascinating. So the way it was described is Memphis is the third team, and one of the two Lakers unprotected picks go to Memphis, and then the Pacers get two different first round picks from the Grizzlies. So it's basically a challenge trade, right? The Pacers would be hoping the two picks they get would have more value than the unprotected pick, and I think unprotected picks are worth exploring. But the Grizzlies have they have all their own firsts, and they have an extra first from Golden State, only protected top four in 2024, and then it becomes top one in 2025 and unprotected in 2026 from the Andre Iguodala salary dump a few years ago. So they do have an extra first in their arsenal that is slightly protected, but still guaranteed to be a first at some point. But this is all just guessing about Memphis's intentions and why they would want to get involved or get this Lakers pick. But anyway, all this to say, they were mentioned as a third team because maybe they value the Lakers picks higher than the picks that they have, or that's what the challenge is. The challenge trade is we think that these picks are better and you think these picks are better. Let's just switch them. So the Pacers could have gotten three first if they did that, two from the Memphis and one from the Lakers. Well, Memphis gets one. I thought that was really interesting as well. And there was another part of this that is apparently farther down that I think makes more sense to include here. But apparently, the Lakers were hoping that they could get the Pacers to include some second rounders to do the two unprotected first deal. If you're the Pacers, I don't get why you would do that unless you really want those first rounders. And again, this trade doesn't make a lot of sense for them unless they're getting the maximum assets. I would not do that. Hold the Lakers over a barrel and negotiate like hell if you're the Pacers. So, Herb Simon, apparently named in this report, apparently grew interested in the Halliburton Hield Turner pairing and seeing them play together, potentially to see how good they fit together or how their price could go up if they play well together. Either way, his desire to kind of keep the trio playing on the court and fitting and all playing for the first time with Miles kept the price high. If it's harder to convince ownership to make a deal, that is, of course, a barrier to a trade. Now, in the ideal world, owners would let their basketball operations people make all the decisions, but he pays the bills and he is the boss of all the people. And I understand why these hurdles exist for every team in the league, but that will keep the price high. And if Herb Simon feels that way for a long time into the season, it's even less likely a deal could get done unless the Lakers step up and meet the high asking price. And then I skipped to it earlier, but the Pacers refused to include any second rounders in the deal. I mean, it doesn't make any sense for them to do so unless it's a matter of shedding some first round pick protections, but it doesn't sound like that is the case. So the iterations were 2027 and 2029 unprotected for Buddy and Miles, and then one with only one first and no Turner, another with one first and no Hield, and then a third one with the Grizzlies. That was a three-team trade that would have had picks going everywhere. So lots of iterations and options here that would have maybe gotten this done, but no formal offer ever presented from the Lakers, according to the report, which is fascinating to me. So they deliberated. They had this council of however many people. Rob Pelinka and crew said, nope, we're not going to do it. So the Lakers part of this now is what is the next part of the reporting, which I think is interesting. Because if you remember, I talked about on a podcast where after Chad Buchanan said on 1075 The Fan, Miles Turner is going to be the Pacers starting center opening night, right? That was before these talks reportedly happened, right? So it is possible that they thought talks were dead at that point and they were reignited. I would not read too much into those comments proving not to potentially be the case. Either way, the Lakers side of this could change, which is what I talked about on that podcast. If they have a slow start, if LeBron loses patience, all sorts of things. If there's any sort of public fighting, if Russ doesn't fit, even if they're playing okay. So there's a lot to look out for on the Lakers side. So that's why I typed some notes on that front. LeBron has expressed public and private support for Westbrook. He was, of course, sort of a factor in the Westbrook trade occurring in the first place. I'm sure they would all like to make it fit together. And if LeBron's on board, it's harder to make that deal ultimately happen. Another note I thought was interesting. They said this article says that Hield and the Pacers are open to a trade that makes sense for both parties. Not that that's stunning to me. Buddy Hield's never made the playoffs, for example. He's on the older side of 30 now. I just didn't realize that would be something that was like so out there like that. Obviously, I think it makes some sense for the Pacers to trade Hield if they can get any sort of positive asset for him, given his contract, even if he could be a talented player and useful fit on this younger team. But, that open about that was the first time any sort of reporting to that level has been seen and will certainly in my head be something I remember when trade season opens up or the trade deadline's coming. Can the Pacers, what will they have to think about with a guy like Hield if he's still on the team at that time? Turner being an expiring contract caused some small hesitancy for the Lakers. They weren't necessarily interested in, again, this is all according to this report, their three highest paid guys next year being front court players if they re-sign Turner plus Davis plus LeBron. All those guys can handle the ball. That doesn't scare me too much, but I get why in a perimeter-oriented league that would be something scary. So this part made me laugh. At the end of the article, it talks about Westbrook in training camp, and he's doing what's asked of him, and he's setting all these screens, and his shot form is different. He's shooting better from three in practice. And I actually believe all those things. I actually potentially believe all of those things are true. If they were really true to the extent that it suggests, or they were true to the extent the Lakers were happy with, they wouldn't be actively shopping him one day before media day. And obviously, maybe they're really enthralled with how he's playing in practice, which is after media day. But I can't believe they want to trade a guy who's playing so well in practice. Sometimes reporting is like that. That's how it goes. They talk to multiple people. They hear all these things. I am not blaming any writer or source for this. It just sounded funny in the context of the rest of the article. So conclusions here. I think that something would still have to change for either team to get this deal done. But it makes more sense to do all these conclusions in segment 3, where we also talk about, is there any reason Russell Westbrook would make sense on the Pacers after the trade would occur if it actually were to happen? We'll talk about all that coming right up here on Locked On Pacers. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Let's keep going through this stuff. I already started this, but for conclusions from all this report, it's ironic that this is a lot of new information about Buddy Hield, about Miles, about the Lakers, about their motivations and things, but it's not that new, right? What it really is a trade package that is closer to what makes sense in reality. The initial time this was reported in The Athletic by Bob Kravitz, it was Westbrook and the 2027 first for both of those guys. That made no sense, right? That just made no sense for the Pacers to do. And then there was some reporting from Hoops Hype that Tice was involved and Horton Tucker was involved, and the Pacers wanted both picks and Horton Tucker, and they wanted the Lakers to also take on Tice. And that's probably too much from the Lakers' perspective. So super weak offers from both sides early. This is the narrowing of, okay, they were actually close. Assuming all of this went down as reported, they were actually potentially close this time, but the Lakers didn't present a formal offer. So my conclusions would be the fact that they got this close means, yeah, this could be something that's brought up again during the season, but I think something will have to change. This is how my stance has been the whole time. Turner gets a nagging injury. Turner plays awesome to start the season or poorly. Same with Buddy Hield. Or the most likely one to me is something goes wrong in Lakerland, right? They start 5-15, or Russ doesn't really fit, or there's some personality clashes, or this isn't even that ridiculous. Dennis Schroeder and Patrick Beverley are just better fits in the backcourt in LA. And these are all things that a new coach will have to figure out, and a team with championship aspirations, which after their last season seems crazy, but it's the Lakers, they do. Something would have to change in that way for them to either be willing to up their price or make the offer formally or something like that. So I think that, yeah, this is a lot of new information kind of confirming what always made sense for both teams to consider: the unprotected picks, maybe third teams, how the money it matters. But my conclusion still remains the same, and that's that something will have to change for either of these teams to really say, okay, it's time to get off our butts, and deadline spur action. That's why media day was a big one to me, and that's why this is a random deadline, but the 20th game for the Lakers. After 20 games, I think I saw a study that 14 or 15 of the 16 playoff teams are generally already in their correct-ish seed, or they're already in the postseason picture, right? Every season. If the Lakers are really struggling after 20 games, that's another deadline that could heat things back up again. So lots of factors at play, but the conclusions remain about the same, even with a more realistic offer that makes sense for both teams on the table for both sides. The Kamenetsky brothers will break all this down over at Locked On Lakers if you want more detail. But to be honest, until there's more reporting, I will not be covering this too much. I feel like I've done 7 or 8 podcasts on this, and it beats me to death because I feel like I'm just talking about nothing. It's something that might happen. It's something that just for a while didn't sound like it made sense for their team until at least this report. I don't like talking about hypothetical stuff that much, but I understand that people really want to hear about it. So I have to find the right line of, coming to you with facts and information and not just saying this is dumb or this is great. So the next time there's any more reporting, I will continue to dive into this. But for now, this is the end of discussing the trade. But one more to talk about it. I get this question a lot from people who zoom out a lot and think about the trade, and they say, why would the Pacers want wow, this is hard for me. Why would the Pacers want Russell Westbrook? And I understand that question being tricky because it sounds like the way a lot of this is framed is Russell Westbrook to the Pacers will be in the headline. I'll probably put it in the headline of this podcast. The Pacers don't actually want Russell Westbrook. At least that is my interpretation of what is happening, based on finances, his play, the Pacers' direction, things like that. Russ was at one point very good, MVP. He still is probably better than he was last season if he fits better on a team. And I still think he's a talented player, even if at some point, not too far from now, if his athleticism wanes, he will not be. But right now, he probably is. But the Pacers, it just doesn't make sense, right? Is there any reason for the Pacers to keep Westbrook in a trade like this? No. The reason the Pacers would make a trade like this is to get the first round picks from the Lakers for Hield and for Turner, right? And then assuming that happens, the Pacers now have one extra roster spot. They could buy out Westbrook if he found a new home, right? They could buy him out. They could just John Wall situation this and send him home and say, don't even bother. And that's a decent facsimile. Yikes. That's a decent comparison because John Wall was on the Rockets last year when they were super young and clearly in a rebuild and wanting to give minutes to all these young guys. That sounds like the messaging we've heard from the Pacers, in our press scrums in the last couple of days, as they have talked about what makes sense for the direction of their team. And so that's kind of what the Rockets were when they sent John Wall home. So I think the Pacers would not make this trade to have Russell Westbrook on their team, but just to get the assets, if that makes sense. So I think a buyout would make sense, or a John Wall situation. But if you're the Pacers, think about what your rotation is at the spots that Westbrook would theoretically play. Even if you stretch it out and say he can play off ball, he probably can't. They would prefer, I think they should prefer, to give minutes to Tyrese Halliburton, who is younger and very talented and worth investing time in on the floor and on ball reps. Westbrook only has 1 year left on his deal. Even in the rosiest situation, doesn't make sense. They want to give reps to their young guys. So now Andrew Nembhard would never play. Chris Duarte would play a little less. Benedict Mather would play a little less. It's just another guard in the mix. It doesn't make sense for Westbrook to eat up touches on this team this year at all instead of those guys, especially if this is a long-term project. That's why I think they would just send him home or buy him out or anything. I think Kravitz reported that in his story as well. So for a team thinking long-term, he just shouldn't play. He doesn't help with development. On the court. Let me be very clear. On the court, he would not help with development. So that's the biggest reason I think he wouldn't be a factor for the Pacers. Now, even in the short term, let's pretend the Pacers do want him to play on the court. Even Russell Westbrook and who the heck else would the Pacers lineup be if they trade Hield and Turner? I mean, they promised Jalen Smith a starting spot, so I would guess like Brissett at the 4, Jalen Smith at the 5, Duarte at the 3, Matherin at the 2. I don't know. Halliburton would start. So yeah, you get the picture though. That's a bad team still. Like even with Westbrook, if they chased wins with him, that team would not be any good. That's the same problem the Jazz had when they were pretending they were going to trade Donovan Mitchell. It's like your team is Donovan Mitchell and a bunch of bad players. That's not a good team. You should trade Donovan Mitchell. And they did. So it wouldn't make sense long-term or short-term for the Pacers to play Westbrook. The way he would have value is he's been in the finals. He's been an MVP. He understands the value of working hard and growth. I think Oladipo talked about how helpful it was for him to see Westbrook in OKC for that year. And then he came to the Pacers and exploded and worked out really well and was an amazing player. Like that has value for sure. If you could somehow tell me right now that if the Pacers acquired Russell Westbrook, he would only practice and he'd wear a suit during the games and be a faux coach, that would make the most sense for them to keep him on the team, keep him on the payroll. But if he's trying to play for this team, it just doesn't make sense. But he would be a great vet. He would be a fantastic vet. He has wonderful experience. So I think it'd be best in a buyout or John Wall kind of situation. It's also not my money. It's not my $47 million to deal with, but that's what makes the most sense from a team building perspective. So again, I would highly encourage everyone who listened to me and my opinions from one team side of this, not both, read the whole article in The Athletic and listen to Locked On Lakers to get more details on this. So that's my thoughts on the latest on the Russell Westbrook to the Pacers trade chatter. Hey, though, can you believe it? What a fitting end to the offseason. Tomorrow, the Pacers play a game. They play a basketball game in Charlotte, opening the preseason. First time seeing Benedict Mathurin, Halliburton, and Turner together. It's finally here. Mark Schindler is going to join me tomorrow. We'll talk all about preseason. So thanks for making Locked On Pacers your first listen every single day. Preseason hoops tomorrow. We'll recap preseason action Thursday. Make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Basketball with Josh Lloyd. Best Australian accent I've ever heard. And the number one daily fantasy basketball show on the planet. Free and available wherever you get podcasts. And super helpful for me, who sucks at fantasy basketball. I am terrible. But hey, lots of fun coming your way here on Locked On Pacers this week as the team will be playing in real games on the court. You know we'll be breaking it all down here for you on Locked On Pacers. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow.